I'm Beverly Tomasian, and I'll be leading this webinar today. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'd like to kick it off with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and are mindful that Diabetes Education Services stands on lands that were originally occupied by the first people of this area, the Mechoopda. And we recognize their distinctive spiritual relationship with this land, the flora, the fauna, and the waters that run through this area. I'd like to give a shout out to my team. We have Brianna, our Director of Operations, and Estrella, our Brand Ambassador and Customer Happiness Advocate. We're here to help you navigate our website, navigate your career path, answer any questions. You can email us and you can phone us. We will definitely get back to you. Diabetes Education Services is an inclusive company. We are committed to promoting diversity and inclusion in our educational offerings. We certainly discuss social drivers of health in each of our courses, understanding that those social drivers can definitely impact lifestyle choices and health outcomes. And so we want to acknowledge and recognize those. As far as conflict of interest for any of my webinars, actually, I have none to declare. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we'll look at the benefits of assessing adverse childhood experiences in individuals with diabetes. Certainly, we talk about diabetes distress and anxiety as common things, and depression that we want to evaluate in people living with diabetes. But I feel like expanding our umbrella and also including those who've had adverse childhood experiences can be very beneficial, both for us as healthcare providers and professionals and the person living with diabetes. We'll look at the relationship between the ACE scores and the risk of future health complications. And we'll look at a person-centered approach to fostering resilience and self-care for individuals with toxic stress, and we'll talk about what is toxic stress. And we'll identify 2 strategies that you can start using today to provide trauma-informed care in your work setting. So diabetes is complex. We know that, people living with diabetes and trying to navigate the daily management and the self-care associated with diabetes is tricky. People might feel confused. Things might change. They might feel unclear. What path do I take? There's a million of little decisions people with diabetes have to make every day. And then you consider all the environmental influences. What's the weather? What's access to food? What is their support? How are their support people responding to them? What's happening in their work environment? What about financial resources? Right now, there's a lot of folks that are struggling because they may not have access to resources for their SNAP benefits. So all of these things are going to impact a person's with diabetes ability to self-manage and to regulate their blood glucose levels. And of course, there's this bunch of pathophysiology that's working in the background that nobody can control, right? Our body is releasing cortisol and insulin and glucagon and other hormones that are impacting blood glucose minute by minute. And it's a very complex interrelationship between our body, mind, and our endocrine hormones and exocrine hormones too. So we want to definitely take all of that into account. Well, I want to say I'm thinking about the pancreas and the exocrine enzymes, but we definitely want to take all of that into account when we're working with people with diabetes and looking at their time in range, their A1C, and their overall glucose management. The other thing I have to talk about as part of this presentation is what goes into a person's health. And before, I think we used to be very focused on their self-care behavior. Like if they eat healthy and exercise, then they'll have a better health outcome. Well, we know that's just part of the equation, that if you look at this division of what goes into health, 40% is based on socioeconomic factors. So access to a job, to resources, to education, what about the family and social support, income, safety in the community, and then 10% to physical environment. Physical environments play a big role. Do we feel safe in our physical environment, or do we feel threatened once we walk out of our house? Are there, pollutants in the air? What about the noise pollution? Do we have light pollution, or do we live where we can walk outside and have access to trees and we can be in contact with nature, or maybe we don't? All of those impact our daily health. And then we have the health behaviors is another 30%. And then 20% is the healthcare. So what kind of healthcare do we have access to? Like I live in a very rural area, and getting in to see the provider might take me a long time, or seeing a specialist, I might have to drive 2 or 3 hours away, where you might live in a different location where you have easy access to specialists and appointments, where there's less barriers. What about healthcare insurance? You know, there's a lot in the news right now about healthcare costs going up. And that's going to impact people's ability to manage their diabetes. So we could have a beautiful situation, everything is looking great, and then things can change and put that person into a situation where they're struggling to make ends meet or to pay their insurance, or they're just struggling emotionally. Maybe something's happened in their life. Maybe they've had a loss or a big emotional upheaval. And so as I think about all the people I meet with diabetes, I work at Indian Health Services Clinic 1 day a week. You know, when I meet with them, I'm thinking about these, we used to call them social determinants of health, but they're changing it to say social drivers of health, because social drivers indicate things can change. Social determinants make it seem like, oh, these are permanent, like you're stuck in this because they're predetermined. But we know now it can change with situations and with your life exposure over time. So now we're really moving to social drivers of health. So we want to tailor our treatment for social context. We know that a lot of people, their social drivers of health are out of their direct control. And so I can't help the family I'm born into and the relationship that, you know, how I'm raised, right? That is out of my control as a child. But that childhood experience is going to move into my adulthood because it's internalized. And we can't separate out our childhood from who we become as adults. We're one continuous human with all of our strengths and barriers and beliefs and all of that rolled into one. So when we're meeting with adults living with diabetes, we are encompassing their whole lived experience. And of course, when we meet with children with diabetes too, right, we're catching up to what they've experienced. So when we look at providing care, we want to consider providing care that's individualized, that meets the person, looking at their security around food. Do they have cognitive dysfunction? We know that people with diabetes have much higher rates of cognitive dysfunction, vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, and we know that almost, 30% of people over the age of 65 have diabetes. And then as we get older, that number just increases. So we are working with individuals that are getting older that have higher risk for cognitive issues. And it seems that people with diabetes have a slightly higher rate of mental illness, including schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. If people are on certain meds like steroids or antiretrovirals that we use to treat HIV, that can actually cause damage to the pancreas and can cause blood glucose levels to increase. And then we look at the history of trauma, which is what this course is all about. And then there's ongoing healthcare disparities. And these healthcare disparities are very present in people. They might be experiencing racism, sex bias, socioeconomic status limitations. They might be part of the LGBTQ community or have loved ones who are part of the LGBTQ community that impacts their emotional well-being. They might worry about their friends and family members. And then we have systemic racism. So there's so many different factors and stressors that impact individuals that we may not be aware of, or we might have some inkling of. But part of what we do is investigate. We're checking in, we're listening, we're looking at body language, we're asking questions and carefully listening to the answers more than just the words. You all know this. It's like in between the words, the facial language, the body gestures, what happens, can they maintain eye contact? Or sometimes they might experience shame. And when people experience shame, they might look down. So we're looking for all of these different responses to our questions. And there's a lot to unpack sometimes. And I want to say before I jump into this lecture that, we might feel hesitant to unpack or ask those hard questions. But in my experience, and I've been doing this for like 30 plus years, I'll ask those hard questions sometimes. Like I just asked a kid the other day, how was your childhood? And he's like, yeah, it was pretty rough. And he didn't really want to talk about it more, and that was okay, but it was enough to let me know that his childhood was tough, and it's probably impacting his ability to self-manage his diabetes today, because he's carrying around a lot of those big emotions from their childhood. And so we don't have to fix stuff, y'all, just so you know. It's not our job to fix things. It's our job to listen, to acknowledge, to evaluate if this person needs further mental health support, certainly, and to honor them and honor their pain, and look at if what their cultural traditions are, their family systems, their social, religious, and employment influences, their attitudes, their health beliefs. I just was working with a gentleman the other day who said, he was on 2 medications, a statin and metformin for his diabetes. And he said, well, I don't know, I just don't believe in those medications. I don't think they're helping me, so I stopped taking them. And even though he stopped taking them, his LDL cholesterol was coming down because he made some changes to his food intake, and his A1C was dropping. And so we allow grace for that. We recognize that sometimes people may not feel like the medical model matches them, and they need an alternative path. And we're going to see how can we support them on that alternative path and still let them know these are the goals of care, and I care about you. We want to help people reach the goals to prevent complications. But ultimately, we all know this, but the person is going to decide for themselves. And if a person decides for themselves and chooses not to take that medication, we're not even going to say they're non-compliant or non-adherent. We're going to say this person made a decision and a choice not to take medication. And that's a big paradigm shift from the old days. I've been in diabetes for 30 years, and in the old days we would say, oh, this person is non-compliant. But in these days, we understand that people have agency and they're going to make choices. Let's do a poll question. JR is 26 years old with newly diagnosed diabetes. JR keeps missing appointments, and when you finally get a hold of them on the phone, they start crying and they say, my life is a mess. JR is struggling with addiction, being unhoused, and weight struggles, in addition to diabetes. Based on this information, what is the most likely barrier to JR engaging in self-care? A, JR is struggling with depression. B, diabetes distress is at the core of the listed behaviors. C, grieving and denial of diabetes diagnosis. Or D, adverse childhood experiences. Let me launch this poll and see what y'all say. So if this is your first time with us, welcome. We're so happy you're here. And also know that these poll questions are really for discussion and exploration. It's not about getting the answer right or wrong. It's just about what do you think is the best answer? And then we talk about it. So, feel free. This is a safe environment. And if you choose the wrong answer, it's okay, because it's still a learning opportunity. I've learned a lot more from choosing the wrong answer than from choosing the best answer in my life, metaphorically and literally. All right, thanks for voting. I won't talk for a few seconds so you can read through that. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. And thanks for participating, and share your results. So 43% of you said A, JR is struggling with depression. 43% said, well, it sounds like adverse childhood experiences. And 14% of you said, well, diabetes distress is at the core of the listed behaviors. So let's just take a look at this again. They're newly diagnosed with diabetes. They're missing appointments. Now, when people miss appointments, we might, some people might say, oh, they're not adherent, they don't care, they're not compliant. But when people miss appointments, in my mind, there's usually a good reason. I mean, some people just forget. Okay, that's one bucket. But lots of folks maybe are afraid of coming in. They are worried that maybe their A1C isn't good enough, or they're going to get lectured in some way, or maybe they feel like embarrassed about something they didn't do or did do, and they may not feel safe. So our job is to figure out, why are people not showing up? How do we make sure they know they are safe regardless? Like if they show up as a mess and their A1C is 12 and they haven't checked their blood sugar for 3 months and they haven't taken their meds, it's still okay to show up. Versus the person whose A1C is 6.3 and they're doing everything right. So we want to let people know, I just don't want to see you when everything is going well. I want to see you when you're a puddle on the floor, because any version of you is going to be loved and cherished. We want to let people know that clearly. So anyways, we get a hold of them like, where are you, JR? My life is a mess, and they're struggling with addiction, being unhoused, and weight struggles in addition to their diabetes. So when I hear this, I'm really thinking about adverse childhood experiences, because we know that addiction is co-associated with folks who have had difficult childhoods and toxic stress, adverse childhood experiences, and especially being unhoused is another adverse childhood experiences can contribute to that and my life is a mess. I mean, could he be depressed? Yeah, but if you think about the addiction and being unhoused, you know, that kind of takes it to the next level. Being depressed would be losing pleasure in doing things, and we're seeing there's other things happening here. And certainly diabetes distress, yeah, I'm going to think about, is this person distressed? But it's bigger than being distressed about this new diagnosis. There's a lot of other things contributing to JR's behavior. So let's talk about adverse childhood experience and see how it could be. How could your childhood experience impact us as adults? And that's the question we're going to answer right now. So when you think about ACEs, it's adverse childhood experiences, things that have happened to you before the age of 18. And then you might want to ask, well, what's the relationship between what happened before you were 18 and my health as an adult? And there's lots of great studies that show this relationship. But Kaiser did really a monumental study that in 1997, and they mailed out over 17,000 questionnaires asking Kaiser Permanente participants, and these were people from all different walks of life and different income levels, and they were asking about specific childhood adverse experiences, and they found out something just really pretty shocking. More than 60% of these 17,000 folks had at least one adverse childhood experience, but 20%, or 18, had 4 or more. Now, we know when people have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, they're much more likely statistically, and looking at it from a population study, to have adverse health as adults. But certainly, 1 or more adverse childhood experience can impact our health as adults. And let's take a look at what are these ACEs. And so these are the 10 assessment areas they use for this study. And now we know there's more areas we need to assess, but just for research purposes, this is the 10 they asked about before the age of 18. So they said, just say, you know, yes, if you've experienced the following before you turn the age of 18. And they put them into 3 buckets: abuse, neglect, and household challenges. So abuse is you have physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. Neglect, physical or emotional. Household challenges, was someone in your home had mental illness? Did you witness intimate partner violence? Was there a parental separation or divorce, incarceration, or was someone in the household using substances, misuse, or dependence? So the more you say yes, yes to these, the higher your ACE score and the higher your risk of future health issues. So this is actually the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire for Adults. And all you need to do is answer, you know, figure out how many yeses. So you could give this in your clinic setting. People could take it online, and they don't have to identify that that was their, you know, assessment. And they don't even have to put, you know, check which ones they say yes to. On this one, it just says your ACE score is the total number of yes responses. And then it asks, do you believe these experiences have affected your health? Now, you might want to know, where do I get these screening tools from? And I put a bunch of websites for you, but acesaware.org is the best website I have found, where it has not only these screening tools in English and Spanish and other languages, but it also has so many great training resources that you can share with your colleagues, with your staff, with your friends, with your family. And then, so this person would just rate how many yeses they have, and then they could share that with you. If they felt comfortable, they would just give you a number, or they might just say, yes, I had a lot of these, and they may not want to give you the number. But the fact that the person has gone through these and recognized that these are issues that can impact their health as adults is very, it's a word, enlightening, where they can say, oh my gosh, this explains so much. I had this, this, and this happen to me as a child, and it kind of helps me understand that, oh yeah, that's why I'm struggling emotionally, or maybe I'm struggling with addiction or extra weight, or I have a lot of internal pain that I can't really figure out where it's coming from. And so just the act of answering these questions can be very life-changing to people. And that could include you. If you've never taken this ACE score, and I'm going to tell you the truth, it happened to me. It's about 10 years ago, I was listening to a radio program and they were talking about ACEs. And that was the first time I heard about it. And they said, yes, people who've had these ACEs have a higher risk of different physical conditions. And when I heard it and I took the ACE, assessment myself, it kind of rocked my world. I want to be honest with you. I go, oh my gosh, things make so much more sense now. And so I want to say to you, many of us entering the healthcare field have experienced childhood trauma, but healthcare professionals have this interesting, I don't know if I'm going to call it a code of silence, but it's kind of like this code where we don't complain. We don't bring up our issues. We deal with it. We don't want to show those dents in our armor. And I'm certainly like that too. I want I want people to see the part of me that's strong and that can get through stuff. But, I have a side that's very soft and tender too. And part of what makes us so great as healthcare professionals is this soft, tender side where we can relate to others and understand the pain that they've experienced. And I'm not saying all of us have experienced childhood trauma. No, not at all. Some of us might have had beautiful childhoods, and I celebrate everyone out there who's had a beautiful childhood. That's amazing and awesome. But some of us might have had a little more difficulty. And why am I bringing all this up? Because when we meet with a person with diabetes, we're not only meeting with them and their lived experience, we're bringing our entire lived experience to the meeting too. And based on our lived experience, we might respond to individuals in different ways, and they might evoke things in us that we didn't even know were in there. So I just want to say that being aware of our life history, in addition to the person that we're connecting with, if it's appropriate, can really make for a more meaningful connection. And the truth is, what is more important than connection? And I actually wrote a book about this because I'm so passionate about it, Healing Through Connection. And the premise here is that as we are present with other people and we're listening and hearing their story, and we're also connecting with our heart, there's healing that goes on for the person who we're witnessing their story, but also for us. Because why do we move into this profession? Because we want to help people. We're here to serve others. And part of this connection that we have in the diabetes space, which I seriously consider the diabetes space as sacred space, where we get an hour with people with that first meeting, where we're intently listening to their story and providing them a safe space to share that story. And we're asking questions, we're being curious, we're just wholeheartedly listening to them. This sacred space is very profound, because if you think about it, really, how many times in your life has somebody just listened to you for an hour and was curious about you? So we get to give that gift to the people in our care. And I used to feel like, oh, I have to be the know-it-all and share all my diabetes knowledge. But as it turns out, the person that I'm serving knows the most about themselves. It's my job to help them find that wisdom that they hold within. Let's get back to adverse childhood experiences. So about 1 in 7 children experience child abuse and neglect in the last year. And we know that this neglect and abuse takes a heavy toll on society. It costs $428 billion. We might need to take children out of their home, put them in protective services. They might need to go to foster care. They might need special services. Maybe they need, mental health coaching. Maybe they have physical problems because of it. But abuse and neglect is a big deal. And what our goal is to try and stop this cycle, because the stress response system is activated. When we experience an event that is threatening, we have a stress response, as you all know. So we can see here, this is from acesaware.com. If there's a stressor, a threat, or an adverse childhood experience, we're going to look for another person, for an affiliate to help us. So we're going to see, is there an adult in the environment or another person in the environment that can say this is real? Because a lot of times people feel like they're gaslit, like, oh, the person doing the abuse might make it sound like, oh, I'm doing this for your own good, or, they might convince that person that they're not worthy of love in some way. So having a validator to say, is this real? Is anyone else here that I need to protect? Is there anyone else here to protect me? So humans are going to look for an affiliate, somebody that can validate what's happening and either protect them or that they need to protect. And then, so that's one aspect of it. And then we have the fight response, where when we feel like we're being threatened physically, we're going to release adrenaline, and that's going to kick up our heart rate. We're going to have sweaty palms, our blood sugar levels rise, blood pressure goes up, right along with the flight response, where fidgety, can't stay still, need to move. So do I need to escape the situation? And I work with people who have experienced a lot of ACEs, and I tell my team, please don't close the door when you put them into the waiting room. It's too scary. They need to have a way out. And in the flight or fight, we're run by emotions, our digestion slows. We're just a big bundle of counter-regulatory hormones. And you can imagine if that just happens occasionally, it's manageable. But if it's happening on an ongoing basis, that person's releasing a lot of cortisol, and that cortisol is contributing to elevated blood pressure, elevated blood glucose. And as we'll find out, it can even impact DNA methylation. So the replication of our DNA and the packaging of our DNA can be affected by this chronic stress. The person might also have a freeze response. So our little reptilian brain might just get involved there and just say, freeze, get numb, can't move. This is where disassociation takes place, still separate from what is happening. Actually, the blood pressure might drop and the heart rate might slow and the person might pass out. So that's another response to this threat and stressor. Everybody responds differently. But this is, something that if it happens on a chronic basis, you can see how much it can overwhelm our body systems. So I just thought I'd talk about the brain's response to stressors. We have our brainstem down here, and that's what we call the lizard brain. It's our oldest part of our brain, and it's going to keep us in a survival state, and it's wanting to know, am I safe or am I a threat? So it controls the autonomic functions. This is why we can, jump out of the way of a train or a moving car even before we recognize we're about to get hit. The reptilian brain just goes, you got to get out of the road. And it's going to give us a big surge of adrenaline, increasing our heart rate, our breathing, our blood flow, and our temperature. It's involved in instinctual processes to keep us safe. And it's critical for the fight, flight, or freeze response. And then we have the limbic brain. So the limbic brain is the emotional part of the brain, or the mammalian brain, and that includes the amygdala. So the amygdala is a big deal, and you'll hear this a lot when we talk about the stress response, because the amygdala is going to start that chain of events that tells our adrenal cortex to release cortisol. So the pituitary is involved in that also. Anyways, so we release a lot of cortisol, and cortisol, as you know, is co-associated with the stress response. The amygdala is known as a threat detector. It detects when we're in danger, and it directs the rest of the brain to do what it has to do to keep us motivated and safe. Again, so we have the lizard brain, that's just this instant, a reflex helping us keep safe. But the limbic brain and the amygdala are involved more in that stressors, like the emotional response to stress, so more long-term stressors. And if we're constantly worrying about if we're safe, you could see how we're releasing a lot of these stress hormones. And what we're trying to do, we'll talk about helping folks manage ACEs, is when they're hanging out in the brainstem and the limbic brain, that's going to cause a lot of cortisol release. So we're trying to move folks over to the cortex or the thinking brain, because in an emergency, our thinking brain is not going to be that involved. But when it's going to be shut down. But when the stressor is over, we want to help people through meditation, through breathing, through being in nature, through getting enough sleep, to hang out more in the cortex, to engage in problem solving and strategies to get to a safer place if that's possible. So, this is the contributors to adverse childhood experience and what we call toxic stress. So there's different types of stress that we'll experience in our life, like positive stress. For example, me getting ready for this program, I had to review my notes and do some research and, see if there's any new data I want to incorporate. So that's positive stress. And I might have a brief increase in my heart rate, might have a little more cortisol being released to get my brain focused. But then there's tolerable stress. And this is serious, temporary stress responsive, buffered by supportive relationships. So I might be struggling with something at work, and I might have a colleague that I'm trying to, to connect with in some way. And then I'm going to check in with my colleagues and have conversations and do some problem solving with that. So it's a manageable stress. But then there's the toxic stress. And this is the part that if children are exposed to toxic stress, that is where we're going to see some impacts later in adult and of course in their childhood too. But this is an activation of the stress response systems in the absence of protective relationships. So this person doesn't feel like they can get safe. So as an adult, childhood stress, toxic stress, can manifest as psychological issues, certainly depression and anxiety, but it can also manifest like diabetes, regardless of lifestyle factors. I want to talk about this more, but the truth is toxic stress is preventable and treatable. There's a big campaign right now that's been going on for about 10 years to identify children who are experiencing toxic stress and talk to their caregivers and parents and whoever's in their life to see, can we reduce this toxic stress to help them live a longer, healthier life? So just like social determinants of health, this is not predetermined. We can change this if we're still in childhood, and even as adults, we can get counseling and support to address these, chronic stressors that we experienced. So as I was mentioning, what is the impact of childhood trauma and toxic stress? Well, we can have neuroendocrine dysregulation. And if you think about diabetes, there's a lot of endocrine dysregulation. And this is interesting to me because I'm sure you've heard about the new Catalyst study where people with hard to treat diabetes, that is, their blood glucose levels aren't coming down, they've discovered it's due to hypercortisolism. So why does this person have hypercortisolism? And it's not due to any Cushing's syndrome or adrenal tumors. It's just their adrenal cortex is releasing too much cortisol. And could this be due in part to early childhood trauma and having this toxic stress response? We don't know yet. So I'm just throwing out ideas here. But why do some people have elevated chronic cortisol levels is the question. We know how to treat it. There's treatments for it, medication treatments. But do our treatments need to extend to meditation and helping people calm down that cortisol response? It's, just the door is open and I'm so excited to see where it goes. Now, if I also have experienced toxic stress, I have an altered immune response. We know that children with toxic stress are more likely to get asthma and different conditions as children. It disrupts DNA packaging. And there's these epigenetic tags that can alter genetic makeup. So lots of times this childhood trauma is passed down from one generation to the next. And we want to try and stop that intergenerational trauma from occurring. and it's going to take work, but I know we can do it, because between epigenetics and disruption in DNA packaging and this neuroendocrine dysregulation, it can lead to different disease conditions that we wouldn't expect in this person based on their lifestyle. So the impact of childhood trauma on adults, certainly lack of physical activity, smoking behavior, these are all comforting behaviors that people might do. Drinking, they might be struggling with alcohol, drug use, miss work because of the consequence of that toxic stress, and they're trying to self-soothe and self-treat many times. The cannabis use for people who've experienced a childhood trauma is much higher in addition to alcohol use. And then physical and mental health, extra weight is very common, diabetes. And now this is even when they control for lifestyle. People with early childhood trauma have more diabetes. They're more likely to have heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones, plus STDs. Suicide attempts is also off the rails higher for people who've had early childhood trauma. So this is from the CDC. And what it says is ACE increases 9 out of 10 leading causes of death in the US. So for people who've had 4 or more ACEs that we've talked about, this is their odds ratio for getting heart disease and stroke. It's doubled. Diabetes, 40% increase. Kidney disease, 70% increase. Doubling of cancers, Alzheimer's, quadrupling, and suicide attempts, so much higher. Why is it that these folks struggle more? And if you think about diabetes, is correlated to all these conditions. So I'm not saying that all people with elevated ACEs get diabetes, but it certainly makes sense that there is a co-relationship, and that when we meet them, we definitely want to address that if it's appropriate. This is from the Mortality and Morbidity Weekly Report published November 5th, 2019. Here was their lead article. Preventing ACEs could reduce a large number of health conditions. 21 million cases of depression, 1.9 million cases of heart disease, 2.5 million cases of overweight and obesity. So what are we going to do? Well, there are different screening tools that I want to mention, and can we incorporate this into our health practice? So we might want to think about starting with kids. So we want to identify if children are experiencing adverse childhood experiences, and actually the caregiver, the parents may not even know that they're imposing this on their children, and it might just be part of the way they raise kids because that's how they were raised. There might just be this intergenerational passing along. So we have this pediatric ACEs and related life events screener to screen children and adolescents. You can give it to the caregiver or the parent, or you can actually give it when they're old enough to the teen, and they can go ahead and take it. And we can, of course, de-identify it if they don't want to be identified. And it's available in English and Spanish. And you could see how do they ask the questions as a little bit different. Has your child ever lived with a parent caregiver who went to jail? Do you think your child ever felt unsupported, unloved, or unprotected? This is such great questions for the caregivers or parents, because now they start identifying what are triggers for adverse childhood experiences and chronic stress that they might not even have considered. Have they ever been screamed at, sworn at, insulted? Have they ever experienced sexual abuse? And then this is interesting, they expand it a little bit more. Has your child ever seen, heard, or been a victim of violence in the neighborhood? Have they experienced discrimination? Have they had problems with housing? And then food insecurity. Have they been separated from their parent or caregiver? They have a parent or caregiver who died. So this gets to the bigger questions and social drivers of health. And if we say yes to these, of course, that child has higher risk. So what do we do based on this? Well, it's the act of recognition is healing. So of course, we want to set up our clinics that if a child is experiencing elevated ACEs, we have resources and counseling for them. But we also want to coach the caregiver and parents to say, yes, now that you've recognized these different ACEs, are there any actions you can take to change your behavior? So we can just start there and see if that person might be able to recognize in themselves behaviors that they might want to diminish or stop, and they might need counseling too. But the truth is, just the act of recognition is healing. Just the act of talking about it changes behavior. What doesn't change behavior is never bringing it up. And so I think many times it seems terrifying to bring all this stuff up, but it can be a big relief for everyone involved to name that thing. So when we provide trauma-informed care, we give voice to the unheard. There is hope for healing, and we are a part of breaking the cycle. And as I mentioned on that acesaware.org, there are so many trainings and programs and resources that you can investigate to see, wow, how can I bring this to my community, to my clinic, to my people, to my congregants, to people that are in community with you, to raise awareness about this. And I love this too. This comes right from the Stress Busters Toolkit from ACEs Aware. And I just copied and pasted some of the most important information I found. So what can healthcare professionals do? And it's called the Listen, Partner, Connect framework. So what we've been talking about, listen, asking open-ended questions about stress and listening to the clients. And then we're going to partner with them. Use strengths-based and collaborative approaches such as motivational interviewing, which you all do, to address what matters most to them. And we're going to focus on their strengths. You've survived a lot of stuff in your life, and it looks like, now you've come to a place where you really need to lean into that. What do you think you can do to make a change or a difference? I know we can come up with something together. So we're going to share with them, after they share with us, our belief in their ability to make these changes. And then we'll refer and connect to resources within our organization or our communities to help them calm their stress response and maybe figure out different ways of connecting with their children or loved ones. So there's 6 principles of trauma-informed approach, and I'm just highlighting some basic approaches here. But a trauma-informed approach helps us be non-judgmental and focus on the client's strengths to motivate and support. So safety. This is really important, that the person we're providing care to feels safe, not judged, and they're in an inclusive environment. Safety in physical settings and interpersonal interactions. Trustworthiness, that the person knows that the decisions are made with transparency, consistency, respect, and fairness. Because you can imagine a person who's had a lot of average childhood experience in their life may have a hard time trusting others. We understand that. And one of our biggest jobs is to build a bridge of trust. Peer support. Then we maybe can get some groups together, support from those with lived experiences or trauma, in case of children with a history of trauma and their family members. And then collaboration and mutuality, partnering, leveling of power differences between and among staff and clients. This is so big. So instead of wearing our white lab coats and standing while we're talking to people, we want to sit down and be at eye level with them to let them know we're in partnership with them. We don't have a feeling that there's a hierarchy here, and because I'm a medical person, I'm much more knowledgeable than you are. No, the thing is, we want to understand that we're connecting at a very human level, and at this place we are equal, and we want to support them in their healing. We want to empower the individual, look at their strengths and experiences, and we recognize that. We recognize their ability to survive in difficult situations, and we recognize their ability to move forward and carry on. And then we also recognize cultural, historical, and gender issues, and we try and move beyond those. And we consider our own internal biases that we may even not be aware of. And when I'm feeling, I'll just call the word judgy. Sometimes a judgy feeling gets evoked in me. I try not to judge myself. I go, Beverly, where is that coming from? Be present with it. And then I have a conversation with myself later about it. And I really investigate, where is that feeling of judgment coming from? And it's usually coming from my past. And so it gives me this opportunity for healing and reflection, so I can maybe avoid that next time. But gosh, you know what, y'all, we're not perfect. And we have our own history. And so this really has helped me to look within and figure out, what do I bring to the appointment, and can I release some of that? I just want to tell you a vegetable story. So I had a gentleman come in to see me at the clinic, and he was eating mostly corn dogs and like pizza pockets every day. He would just reheat those for breakfast and lunch. And he didn't really have a job. He was at home all the time because he had some mental health issues he had been working on. And so I felt like he needed vegetables. And so I said, can you get some vegetables into your day? And he was like, well, I don't really like vegetables. I go, well, they're so good for you. They're so full of fiber, and you can get frozen ones, and they're not that expensive, and they still have all their nutrients, and you can cook them when you feel like it, or you can get canned. If they're really salty, you can rinse them off. Like, I was just this wealth of information, and I was sharing with him all the reasons that vegetables are so good. And of course, I'm right? Fiber is great for people. Vegetables is great for people. Like, I'm absolutely correct that he wasn't there to talk about vegetables. He was there because he was just trying to get by with his diabetes. He was struggling emotionally. But for some reason, I felt compelled to encourage this person to eat more fiber and vegetables. And I think sometimes we get stuck in those places. And I'm kind of embarrassed telling you this story right now. But later on, I said to myself, girl, what were you thinking? Just focus on vegetables so much. And I want to tell you the truth. That person had an appointment with me last week, and they didn't show up. And I know why they didn't show up, because they were worried I would once again, criticize them for not getting enough nutrients and fiber related foods. And I'm working on forgiving myself for that. And I'm going to reach out to that person and say, what can I do to repair this relationship? Because you're important to me, and I apologize. So I'm telling you that because, we sometimes come from the best place thinking we're sharing this important information, but we're not meeting the person where they're at. And we want to recognize people that have experienced toxic stress or experiencing it, and encourage them to engage with these stress busters. Now, these seem so basic, y'all, but they're so important. And I think helping people realize that getting enough sleep, I talk about sleep a lot now, because we know that when we're underslept, we tend to eat foods that are not as healthy for us. We tend to, we feel hungrier, but also our blood glucose levels go up when we don't get enough sleep. We release more cortisol. Nutrition, activity, mindfulness practice, what does that mean? It's different for everyone, but I have some apps that I recommend if people want to do mindfulness practice, even for 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Getting out in nature, can't say enough about it. Moments of awe, being with trees, breathing in different smells of the fall. It's also good for us. Mental health care, supportive relationships. I mean, these are like medicine for individuals who experience toxic stress. And, it's so critical that we bring this up, talk about it, help them figure out ways that they can incorporate this into their life. And again, I'm going to bring you right back to this website, acesaware.org, where I got a lot of this information from today, that what they have are handouts for people living with diabetes and individuals who are experiencing stress, and these different stress busters that they can use. So I want to say differently. It's not really for people living with diabetes, but we know many people with diabetes are experiencing stress, and these toolkits will help them. It will help them with their stress management, and also it will help with their diabetes. And I just wanted to share with you all the different resources they have. You can look at resources by topic, by stage. You can look at Spanish, and then there's other information for patient and family handouts, and policy research, organizational toolkits. If you want to make this part of your organization's strategy, they have information there. Let's do another poll question. JR is a 22-year-old living with type 1 diabetes who arrives late for their appointment and seems out of sorts. When looking at their ambulatory glucose profile, you notice the time in range is less than 40%, and the coefficient of variation is also over 40%. You remember from a previous visit that JR had experienced almost half a dozen adverse childhood experiences and had elevated diabetes distress. Based on this information, what's the next best step? A, Use the empowerment approach to help JR take charge of their life. B, request that JR is referred to a mental health specialist. C, use motivational interviewing techniques to help JR through this rough spot. D, create a judgment-free zone and explore with JR how they are feeling. All right, so let's take a look at this. JR is 22 years old with type 1. They come in, they're out of sorts. Their timing range is 40%. Their coefficient of variation, that means the fluctuations of blood glucose, is also elevated. And they had experienced almost half a dozen adverse childhood experiences. What is the next best step? All right, we'll wait a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll since 100% of you chose the best answer. Yes, it is. Create a judgment-free zone and explore how they're feeling. And so, when they're late and they're out of sorts and things seem like they're all over the place, I'm going to ask the person this question: how are you feeling? We want to create a judgment-free zone, roll out the carpet of acceptance, letting them know there's no bad or good blood glucose numbers. There's no such thing as cheating. It's not your fault that you have diabetes. You are not failing at your diabetes. And just thanking JR for showing up today is going to be really important. So the two most important things we're going to say is thank you for coming today. It seems like you have a lot on your plate. This is a judgment-free zone. I'm just here to listen and support you. We could verbalize that or let them know through our body language. And, how are you feeling? I really want to know what's going on, or what's the most difficult thing with your diabetes right now? Because this diabetes thing is tough. We know that based on this survey that looked at 2,600 people with diabetes across 8 countries, that nearly 40% of missed doctor's appointments are due to stigma or shame. And this is where that judgment-free zone comes in, where regardless of what your timing range is or your blood glucose is doing or what you're doing, please show up, because it's not going to be a place where you're judged. It's going to be a place where we support you, help with problem solving, and letting them know that it's safe here. It's such a big deal. The other thing I talk about a lot, and when I have more time, but this is just kind of focused on ACEs, but it really comes back to emotions as a priority. With diabetes, it's so easy to get caught up in the medications and what's their blood pressure and their A1C and, what's their activity, what are they eating? All of that is so important. And I, absolutely believe we need to talk about that. But from the Embark study that I was actually, lucky enough to be a part of, that we found out something very important: addressing diabetes distress, addressing emotions first, help open the door to addressing the different self-management behaviors. Because if people are stuck in diabetes distress or they're struggling with toxic stress, it's so hard to think about managing diabetes. And so I think in the past, I would say, well, let me talk about all this other stuff first, then we'll get to emotions. But now I'm giving myself permission to let emotions take the front seat. Because when people have diabetes distress, it acts as a brake on the application of existing knowledge. People may have a lot of great diabetes knowledge, but they can't access it or implement it because there's too much stress in their lives, and that's acting as a brake. By releasing the diabetes distress brake through emotion-focused intervention, we can really very efficiently end this negative cycle. The other thing I think about a lot is commit to listening at least half the time. And so as part of my, appointments, I can tell if I'm talking too much, then I'm getting into that judgy place of myself. And what I need to do is ask questions and let the person, I want to listen to their story and listen to what's going on in their life. This is a great tool you can use when we're setting goals with individuals, and it's from ACEs Aware again. When a person has experienced significant ACEs, their body may make more or less stress hormones than is healthy, and this can lead to physical, mental health problems. And the following tips can help you manage your stress response. So this is getting back to those stress busters. healthy relationships, exercise. What is my goal? Mental health. I've set a goal. And then here's some ideas to help improve self-care, limiting screen time, making a plan for what to do when I'm feeling stressed, partnering with my friends or family to get support when I need it, making regular appointments. And there's more resources here too that are listed. So this is available for free on the acesaware.org. Do not be dismayed by the brokenness in the world. All things break and all things can be mended, not with time, as they say, but with intention. So go, love intentionally, extravagantly, unconditionally. The broken world waits in darkness for the light that is you. Wow, that's powerful. And that kind of brings me to the point that ACEs are not destiny. Just because somebody had a lot of adverse childhood experience, it doesn't determine who they are going to become or their outcomes. They might have had a lot of adults in their life that supported and protected them, and they might have a lot of resilience as a result of it. They might engage in post-traumatic healing, where they actually take some of that trauma and turn it into their superpower. So we understand all of that. And I love Nadine Burke Harris. She was actually, I want to say that differently, Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, the first Surgeon General of California. And she was involved in early studies looking at ACEs. And it was her goal as the first Surgeon General of California to increase awareness of this, because she says with early detection and evidence-based intervention, we can transform health outcomes. We can do that by supporting resilience, recognizing people's strength, and then encouraging actions that can help buffer the toxic stress response, which we've talked about already. And right here in the middle is person-centered care. Being trauma aware saves lives. I was working with a gal who really struggled with her diabetes, but it was a result of her adverse childhood experiences as a kid. And I was meeting with her for, I think it was the first time, and I was just picking up on a lot of energy that she had struggled as a child. So I asked, how was your childhood? Have you ever taken the ACE assessment? And she goes, oh my gosh, you're the first person who asked me about my ACEs. And she goes, I scored 9 out of 10 on the ACEs. And she goes, it's so important that people know and understand that my childhood experience is impacting my behavior and my choices today. And she was so grateful. And she, even though things are tough in her life, she keeps showing up. I'm so proud of her. And she said to me, I finally feel like someone actually cares what happened to me and is providing me with help and support. And believe me, we don't dig into her childhood and go over what happened, but I just am present with her and I let her know I'm here for her. It's a safe place to meet, and that I want to support her, even taking little baby steps. It makes a big difference. So thank you so much for joining us for our ACEs Aware and how it relates to diabetes. I'm so appreciative for you and appreciative for the care you give to people with diabetes. And I'll hang out to answer any additional questions that you might have. But for now, this is Coach Beverly signing off. Thank you so much.